Hello, lovely humans. I'm Luna Robbie, and you are listening to Sex Stories, a podcast of personal histories where we learn from each other and practice deep, non judgmental listening in order to co create a more loving world. If you want to express your love for this show, you can find ad free episodes on Patreon, get personal with me on OnlyFans, sign up to be a guest, and check out the awesome brands to support our show. Links are in the description below or visit sexstoriespodcast.com. Now, please enjoy this episode. Our guest today is a straight cis man in his 40s who's in a committed, ethically non-monogamous long-term relationship. Like me, he agrees that safety is sexy and is into all things sensual, flirting with new people, and passionate connections in swingerish and or poly spaces. He is passionate about sex-positive healthcare, honest, informed grown-up sexual health, and helping people overcome shame, misinformation, and barriers to sexual wellness. The founder and CEO of Shameless Care, a telehealth company we are partnering with that is focused on sex-positive healthcare, which you can learn more about through our link in the description below, and use code LOVER for anything you want to get there. With us today from Illinois, welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm so excited to get your full story, but first, could you please start out by telling us if you had to rate yourself on a sexual shame-o-meter, with 10 being the most full of shame and 0 being like, I truly am the shameless human of shameless care, where do you fall today, and when, if ever, has your shame-o coaster squiggled throughout the years?
What a great question. I would say I'm definitely at a 1 now,
Yes.
but I remember distinctly having this conversation with myself at one point when I was young, where I would have sex, and I'm talking like high school, right out of high school, and of course having the pregnancy concern that any heterosexual male would have. And going through pregnancy scares and then like STI scares, which I now realize were basically nonsensical when you consider all the factors that were in play at that time, but I didn't know that. And really having to have this conversation of like, look, Robert, you can stop having sex or you can stop feeling bad about it. But right now you feel really bad about it and you're unable to stop yourself from having sex. And this just makes no sense whatsoever. And really from that day forward, it was really freeing to me to be able to kind of set that aside and have a little bit more of like acceptance. Like, okay, this is who I am. I'm someone who enjoys sex. Of course, I now realize that makes me like almost every other every other man on earth, right? Or most of them anyway.
At least naturally, until someone traumatizes us, like, I think it's natural
Yeah,
for us to like sex until we get socialized otherwise. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's what
absolutely.
happens when I get excited. Yeah, wait, so how old were you when you were like, actually, I'm unable or unwilling to stop having sex, right? Like, it's like, I don't
Yeah,
want to stop.
I would say, I was probably like 18 or 19, something
Okay.
like that, just looking back. And, I distinctly remember a pregnancy scare in high school, which now I don't even know was a pregnancy scare. It was just like, at the time, it was like, oh, that would be like the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. And, just kind of like, oh God, if you can get me through this one time, I promise I'll never have sex again. And then, I was having sex a week later, right? So like, I just had to have this realization of like, this isn't realistic. And I kind of bring that into the business side as well, where we're going to talk about this later, I know, but like Doxy-PEP, for example, so many people offer that as a single dose. And we just refuse to do that because I don't want people going from one emergency to the next. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you need like a year supply on hand because if you did this thing once, you're probably going to do it again, don't you think? And it's better to be prepared than just like going from one panic to the next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into all the details. First, however, I would love to hear what is sexy to you. Give us your personal definition.
Oh, I love flirting. I mean, I think that coming from the consensual non monogamy background, so many people are hesitant to flirt. They try to make sex just this purely physical act. And great sex to me is like, it's like an itch, right? That you get to scratch. But it's so much better if it's been itching for a while, if there's like this fire burning, if there's this passion. It's like a movie. Imagine if the movie started and ended with just the action sequence at the end, the grand finale, but you didn't really know who the characters were and you didn't care about them. That would be the most boring thing on earth. You only care about that climactic scene because you've had an opportunity, you've had an hour and a half of this movie to learn about this character and really, fall for them in a way. And that's exactly how I feel about sex. Even a completely casual sexual situation, I feel like needs a great deal of build up and flirting to even be worth doing.
Yeah, I totally hear that. People are like, "Oh, so you just, like, love to get with strangers?" And I'm like, "Well, I talk to them first, and I only connect with people that I connect with. Like, if someone is not a vibe with me, I don't and if someone just treats me like a total object, we have to talk long enough about what that role play means to each of us for it to be fun." Like, it's like I totally get that. Are you usually the flirter or the flirtee? Like, or does it just depend on the moment and the mood? Like, are you more likely to initiate flirts or receive them or just kind of see what happens?
That's an interesting question. I would say I'm mostly the initiator, but it's so reciprocal, right? I mean, people in the swinger lifestyle, for example, people often think that they'll go to something like a swinger club and, they're like a hot couple and people are just going to be asking them to go to bed left and right. And I'm always like, it's much more likely that you're going to be ignored the entire night because no one wants to be told no. So people only proposition people if they have a good reason to believe that there's been a lot of flirting and lead up that's leading to that moment.
Yeah.
Nobody just walks around like, "Hey, want to go to bed? Want to go to bed? No. Okay, great. Want to go to bed? No. Okay, great." So if you're flirting with someone and they're not flirting back, you're not getting that energy. You just immediately move on to somebody else, right? I mean, that's the way it seems to work in the real world anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am a big fan of spaces where it's like there's an opportunity for community building. That's why I've really struggled at some of the sex parties that I've been to where it's so loud and then it feels like predatory. Granted, I'm a single female and that's a whole other thing, but it's just like it's kind of this like, "Hey," and it's not even a personal hey, it's just sort of like, "Hey, what are you doing now? What are you doing now? What are you doing now?" And I'm like, "Huh? Sitting in the hot tub. What are you doing?" "Oh, yeah? What are you gonna do next?" And I'm just like, "Well, that's not it's not
Yeah.
personal." So, okay, tell us now, what is your sex life like right now, and what are your favorite parts?
Right now, I have a wife and a girlfriend, and I'm not so much busy in consensual non-monogamy anymore. In terms of like, for example, we went to Naughty New Orleans this past summer, which is a big swinger convention, but we were there entirely on business, running a booth. And so I'm afraid that as I get older and more focused on business, that is becoming kind of what my consensual non-monogamy role is running this sex positive business. And that's good and bad because it's become a bit of a shame where I really can't enjoy myself to the same extent that I used to. But we all have different roles as we, grow throughout life and things are always changing and that's totally fine.
I can totally relate, and I have to also tell myself there are many different seasons. I unwittingly became an educator. I'm like, I'm an artist. I'm not if you're learning, that's your own thing." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I have a lot of knowledge. Oh, I see. Oh," and it puts me in this sort of like different role. And I like to think the opportunities will present themselves when they are correct. Also, I feel like when someone has a wife and a girlfriend, that is pretty consensually non-mono even if it's not new partners on the fly, like, that's do you have, like, a nice balance? How often do you get to, like, play with each one?
I have a nice balance, but I'm afraid that as I'm hearing you talk about it now, I'm realizing how much business is impacting like my relationship with both of them as well, right? I'm
Mm.
sure a lot of people in your audience are entrepreneurs and you just are so hyper focused on, getting over that hump
Yeah,
that never seems to be enough anyway, like that hill just keeps climbing.
yeah, yeah.
There's always like another milestone. For example, my girlfriend helps me out with the podcast that we do.
Nice.
And, that changed the relationship as well. Cause while that sounds really fun, it's like, well, it is, but it's also like another thing we have to do. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, on Tuesday night, we're going to record two podcasts instead of, I don't know, going to the bar and
yeah.
laughing and not worrying at all about our living, our income, or anything like that.
Totally.
So
However, there is research that says that partnerships who have business together, not just the like unconscious business that is running a household, which truly, in my opinion, is a business, which most people don't treat it that way,
sure.
they last. They're bonded more, and it's a different sort. What I'm hearing is there are humps you're achieving, and perhaps there could be space to make more time for other types of humps.
Yes. Yes, exactly. The fun humps is getting replaced by the other humps for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It also, though, reminds me of what you said at the beginning of like, that's deep relationship building. And that's like, we care about the characters even more. So then when you get to the exciting action scenes, shall we say, it's all the more wonderful. Or maybe you just need to like Kimberly and I are not lovers. Kimberly is my right-hand human, but we are very, very, very dear friends. Like, we are work partners, but we also do our, like, business days at the spa. Like, we'll have, like, the
Mhm.
morning meeting, and then we'll spend the day spa daying when we've hit our certain goals. So I'm, like, imagining a future guest update where you come back and you're like, "Here's how we entwined business and pleasure." That's just
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us now, how did you learn about sex and pleasure and connection growing up? Like, take us through your personal timeline, getting to Shameless Care, getting to what led to all of that, starting with, when do you first remember hearing about sex? When do you first remember understanding what it was?
Well, I'm a weird person where I genuinely enjoyed that junior high kind of puberty sex class that we had. I mean, I was raised pre-internet, which is both a blessing and a curse, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
But I knew absolutely nothing about puberty, nothing about sex. And I learned a tremendous amount from that course. I'm sure there was some shaming things in there. I'm sure there was probably a little too much, don't get pregnant. And of course, I was born in 1980. So this was probably like 91, 92 when AIDS was still a death sentence.
Yeah.
And, Magic Johnson, and it was definitely in the news all the time. I'm sure there was maybe a tad too much of that, but I don't really recall that. I just remember some messages that I thought were quite positive, like, everybody's penis is more or less the same. The size of yours is fine. I distinctly remember a scene where it's like an older brother is coming out of the shower, and the younger brother's like, "You're so much bigger than me," and then they have like this talk. I'm sure that's available on YouTube somewhere. This old 1990s, sex ed course. So I might be the only person who's like, you know what? I genuinely enjoyed that and learned a lot, and that's probably where I learned the most. And then, of course, back then, my exposure to pornography was like dirty magazines and things like that, where I still remember those pictures because at a time when I was raised, you had very little access to it. Like you might have had like a magazine. And so each one of those pictures was pretty formative. Now I'm sure, young people who have access to pornography are seeing hundreds of images a day, right? It's a completely different world, but I could still draw like the women I saw in these magazines because it was just so formative for me. I'll never forget, and this is it's one of those stories that seemed really funny at the time and still kind of does, but maybe is a little bit gross. I distinctly remember being like a freshman in high school. And again, for your younger listeners, this is pre internet. You have to kind of imagine that. And my buddy's dad comes home and we're like out in the yard, talking or whatever. And he goes, "There's two Penthouse magazines behind the seat of that truck, and I definitely don't want you guys getting them." And like that was his way of like giving them to us, not in a predatory way.
Right.
He was not, it was just kind of like he, as a middle aged male, thought, well, every young man should have, something to relieve the stress, essentially. So I still remember that as well. So a lot of formative memories, but I don't think that my background was unusual compared to other people who grew up at that same time period. And like I said, now it's a world that's would be hard for me to relate to, as a young person back then.
Yeah, it's totally changed. Do you remember getting any implicit or explicit messages from family members or friends about sex? And like did your friends talk about masturbation, or was there any kind of like discussion as you were growing up?
I mean, I was in high school in the 90s, so everything was really crude. I mean,
Mm,
it's things are crude now, but I mean, I think purposely insulting back then. So a lot of like anti-gay slurs and like stuff like that that hopefully doesn't exist as much anymore. So the conversations that I would have with my friends about sex were mostly awful, if that
okay.
makes sense. I don't remember ever having a conversation about sex that was like productive or that I would now take ownership of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think most of my education about sex just came from the sex education class, like I told you about, and pornography, and then having sex, myself as I got older.
Do you feel comfy sharing about some of those formative experiences, maybe with yourself and or others? Like, when you learned about it, you mentioned the shame earlier on, then you mentioned kind of like not having the shame. So walk us through what that was like for you internally as you were learning about your body.
I just had a really funny memory, which is the first time I ever felt female genitalia. she was still wearing her jeans, and we were like making out and stuff. And I was like sliding my hand down her jeans. And I remember getting really confused because like I felt pubic hair, but then nothing else because I expected it to be in like the same place that mine are. If that makes sense. I didn't know I had to keep going down and then like underneath. And I know that sounds so ridiculous, but I don't know how long it's been since I've thought about that. But that just comes back to my brain right now. Like it's so easy to forget as you get older how little young people know
Yes.
about things
Yes.
and how little patience we sometimes have for people who just haven't had the opportunity, to learn things. So I distinctly remember that. I remember the first time I ever went to have sex, I had terrible performance anxiety. My penis just basically didn't work at all. And of course, I had no frame of reference for this at all. I didn't understand what was going on. Now I understand it completely. I could write an essay on what's happening behind the scenes. But yeah, those are the memories that come back to me. And I realize I didn't give you a lot of positive ones, perhaps, but those are the ones that stand out to me at the time.
I mean, I love that. I love the standout stories, especially those unique ones of like, wait, what is happening? Because I think it does highlight exactly what you said is like, even in a world now where we're inundated with sexual information or where we get some sex ed, emotional context on the whole, I find lacking. And so that's why I love having these conversations about like, well, what do you remember? What was it like for you?
Mhm.
When did it start getting fun for you? Like, take us into the next era of your development, if you will.
I think swinging was really the time when I'm surrounded by people who are doing the very thing that you're always warned against, right? Which is casual sex. I talked earlier about sexual education. I mean, I think most of us are raised to believe that if you have casual sex, that all of these bad things are going to happen to you, STIs, pregnancy, that you literally can't do those things without the what some people consider to be natural consequences of what some people consider to be immoral behavior, right? And when I was in that world, I realized that I'm surrounded by super smart, successful people, people who really have their life together, like these fantastic parents who, one Saturday night a month finally gets to leave the house and have like some me time, right? And how amazing they were and how amazing they were to talk to. And I would meet people who had been doing that for 30 years and
Yeah.
seemed to be thriving. Like nothing bad happened to them. They seem to be having the time of their life. Like, look at her. She's in her mid 50s and she's, dressing hot and she's having a great time dancing with her husband. And that was really the turning point for me to see like, okay, this is a world and this is something that people do and they're thriving in it and this is really fun.
Yeah. How old were you when you started getting into non-monogamous situations, and do you feel comfy sharing a little bit about, like, what led you there?
I would say I was definitely in my probably late 20s. And people ask me that question all the time because you cannot go to a swinger party and have a conversation. People always ask what led you into that world. And I think for that reason, because that question comes up so much, people must usually have like an aha moment. Like, well, one night we were talking about, I just really don't know. I think my wife is just really confident and open-minded and willing to try just about anything, right? And so we went to a party for the very first time, and I distinctly remember I held on to my car keys all throughout the tour and for like the first hour because I was like, if anything, and I do mean anything is going crazy, we're out the door. And it didn't take long within the first couple of hours to feel like, you know what, this is the coolest place I've ever been. Like I've never been to a place before where people are so open and honest and just wonderful.
Yeah.
Nobody's drunk, nobody's arguing. It's a really, for your listeners that haven't been to a swinger club, for the most part, it's a truly amazing place with people who, if you go to like a major league baseball game, for example, and somebody's drunk and they're like, you looking at my woman, and they're like pretending they want to fight, or maybe they even actually do get in a fight. Those people don't go to swinger clubs. There's nothing about
Right.
that guy that's going to take him to a swinger club. He's too insecure, right? He has an alcohol problem. Like he's just not going to be there. And when you eliminate all of those guys from the room, you end up with like a really, really cool party in a place where basically everybody feels safe and comfortable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that those have been your experiences. And I think you hit upon such a great point that it does take a certain level of self reflection and conscious choice to step outside of the norms that are prescribed to us, right? To say, actually, we love each other. We love to have sex with each other. And what if there was more? Or what if we even just watched? Or what if we talked to other open minded people? And I find when I am in spaces of open-minded, non-judgmental humans, it tends to be pretty fun and hot, regardless of how much sex is going on, right? Like I just have great conversations, great connection. The flirting is fun. The people are interesting, and they're usually pretty badass because there is that, like you said, the ego stuff has to be solved a little bit to let go of the self-judgment or the fear to step forward with that
Mhm.
confidence. Okay, so what have you learned about yourself since you entered the world of ethical non-monogamy? Like, where did it lead next?
It's definitely a course on self-improvement. I don't think anybody can deny that. People who survive it anyway. I distinctly remember the first time my wife had a date with someone else. I was completely caught off guard by my feelings and really turned into this guy who was sending like passive, like I had just agreed to this and wholeheartedly agreed to it and wanted it to happen. Then when it happened, all these feelings popped up that I wasn't expecting, that I was unable to control. And then I start sending like, jackass text messages, like I'm purposely ruining everything. And, that is awful of me. And I wish I hadn't have done that, but I wouldn't do that now. I learned from it. And so I believe that this is just a giant course in self improvement. It's really helped me in business too, even in businesses that had nothing to do with sex, because, if I go to a vacation at Hedonism Resort, for example, you have to imagine, your listeners have to imagine who haven't been there. They have an area of the resort that's called the nude pool, and you have to be nude to be there.
Yes.
You can't
Ah, I
even wear
gotta go.
bottoms as a
I love that.
you can't
That's
even
why I
wear
love
bottoms
K
as a
spas.
woman.
I'm like, we have to be naked. Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody there, even if you're clearly, the 20-year-old couple is going to be talking to the 70-year-old couple, there's
Yeah.
probably not any sexual attraction there. Both sides know it. But it's just a
Some of us of all ages are very into older people. I had an 88-year-old boyfriend briefly, so
All right. Well, I spoke too soon. But you get my point. I feel like everybody's just talking, regardless of if they think there's any sexual attraction or not. And you very quickly learn how to strike up a conversation and network and ask for the order. I mean, if you're going to ultimately ask people for sex, what are you doing? You're asking for the order. That's something that most salespeople can't
Interesting.
do.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. Because I always train people to create an irresistible invitation along with any, you're going to ask for my time. What's the irresistible? What are you offering? What do you bring to the table?
Yeah.
What will that collaboration look like? Oh, I love that's so interesting. You're blowing my mind. I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah. What do you bring to that ask? Ooh, okay. Sorry to interrupt. I got excited.
No, that's okay. I just think that the lifestyle for me has been a constant self-improvement
Yeah.
that I
Wait.
don't
So
know that I would have gotten in any other way.
how do you ask for the order? I mean, I'm sure it's different person to person, but in those instances, like, what's the closing? You're flirting, you're talking, and then you just say exactly what you want. And how do you know what you want?
Well, I'm super big into explicit verbal consent, and that is
Right.
something that is often lacking in the lifestyle. And this a whole debate we could have, or not a debate really, but a conversation. And for your listeners who may not know, although I'm sure they all do, explicit verbal consent in the way that I think about it anyway is you're consistently asking and then getting an explicit verbal response before proceeding.
Yeah.
And so, for example, even on the dance floor,
Yeah.
if you go on the dance floor as a woman at a regular bar, somebody's probably going to grab you, somebody's probably going to pull you in. Hopefully, at a sex positive club, if people are doing this properly, they're going to say, "May I touch you?"
Yeah.
And then, as things escalate, if they are in fact escalating because of energy and stuff like that, then you continue to ask. And people often think that that is an unsexy way of doing things, that people should just have the confidence to just do it and see how people react. And it's no wonder people think that way. I mean, your listeners out there, I encourage them to ask themselves if they've ever seen a romantic comedy. And of course, probably everybody has. Now, ask yourself if you've ever seen a first kiss in a romantic comedy. Of course, everybody's probably nodding yes right now as they're driving. Now, ask yourself if the person who does that kiss ever asks beforehand, or do they just lean in because they're on the porch and the time is right and they're building up the courage? So, explicit verbal consent is not normal, but I
It's
do
not
think that
normalized.
it's not normalized. Yes, exactly. Thank you for saying that. It's not normalized yet. But I do think that it shows a great deal of confidence. It's the exact opposite of what people think. People think it's like, oh, you don't have the courage to do it. It's like, it takes way more courage to say, wow, you're really beautiful. Is it okay if I touch you while we dance? Like that takes so much more confidence. And I think your listeners will find people warming up to them so much faster under those circumstances that, the ask to actually go to bed will come quite naturally, I think, after some buildup of that.
I would guess, and lovers tell me if I'm wrong, most people who listen to me are fans of explicit consent. That is definitely my thing. I'm the neurotype that really loves to spell it all out more than most people. It's why the container of sex work is really good for me. I'm like, what exactly do you want to do? How much exactly do you want to do it? How okay. And I really, really am teaching people. I just had an episode that's like how I turn nervous lovers into sex gods. And it's actually with explicit communication, one little drip feed at a time. And I find that when I am clear with my lovers about what is or isn't on the table, then they become extremely confident because the edges of the playground are clear and they know what rides we're going to go on. They know that maybe I don't want to do a slide today because it's hot, but I definitely want to swing. And I noticed that that actually encourages their natural creativity to connect with me rather than like, all right, we're gonna do the swings, and then we're gonna play some tetherball, and then we're gonna go on the jungle gym. Like the kind of like first base, second base, third base home run situation that most people eventually find boring, like those dance steps. And so I love you highlighting the explicit communication and love that that's been your experience. How did you get from swinger community, these experiences, to shameless care? I happen to know you have a juicy story. Will you please tell it?
Absolutely. So I was getting STI tested every 6 months and really hung my hat on this idea that I was really progressive. Now, I know that there are groups of people, for example, people that work in the adult industry and things like that, they get tested as often as every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But for me, every 6 months felt like the right frequency. But ultimately, that made me pass along a gonorrhea infection to other people, not because of the frequency of testing. And I think it's really important everybody understands this. I had just gotten a quote unquote complete STI test, including a test for gonorrhea, which showed that I was gonorrhea free. And just about a day after getting those results, a partner texted me and told me that I had given her gonorrhea because she was asymptomatic as well, but her husband had exploded with gonorrhea symptoms, and all the signs pointed back to me. And I was really nice. Of course, I wasn't like, I got this, negative test result. Click. I was like, okay, I hear you, but also I'm confused now because I'm looking at a negative gonorrhea test result that I just got since I've been with you. And she said, well, have you ever been throat swab tested? And I had never even heard that phrase before. I had never even heard that phrase before. And so off I go to get a throat swab. I had to go to 3 different doctors until I found one who
Yep.
even knew what that was.
Yep.
And the third doctor swabbed my throat, and sure enough, I had a completely asymptomatic case of oral gonorrhea. And that bothered me a good bit for lots of reasons. One, it knocked me off my peg so hard from thinking I was this super progressive. And I was trying to be, but I had to go from that to realizing, no, I don't really know much about this subject. But also, and I'm not suggesting that this is how people should have sex. I'm just being realistic about how most people do have sex. I think it's fair to say that most people out in the world today have unprotected oral sex, even if they use a condom for penis and vaginal sex or penis and anal sex. And again, I'm not suggesting that they should or shouldn't. I'm just being realistic. You can go to Walgreens, you'll find 10 different kinds of condoms. You won't find a dental dam there. I think we just have to be realistic about what people are actually doing out into the world. And so whenever they go to get that STI test that we're always clamoring they should go do, if they're not being tested in the very part of their body they're most likely to be infected, then what a public health disaster.
Yes.
And it just really, excuse my language, pissed me off to the point that I had to do something about it. I wrote emails to that company that I had bought a test from several times. And at the time, I didn't realize why they wouldn't include it. I now know why they can't, which I won't go into. But I was like, please, please, please add throat swabs. They wouldn't do it, wouldn't do it. And so I decided, okay, the only way I can really address this is to create a company that does really thorough testing.
I love that so much. And I would love to share with you my throat story. I'm into deep throating, and I had a partner, and this was before I was a professional. And at Nevada legal brothels, they are tested once a week for swabs, once a month for the blood test. So even more frequently. And I did not have the high health and safety standards that I do now. And back then I was like, yeah, like obviously we'll use a condom. I'm not in birth control, but like I'll go down on you without anything. And I have skills. And we had also had a talk. We'd talked about testing. We'd talked about partners because my personal preference is, have you been tested at least 30 days after your most recent unprotected partner? So like enough time for something to set in at the outset. And then I want clear tests in between if I'm going to fluid bond, if I'm going to. So I was like, all right, well, we both have clear tests, all clear. I can definitely go down on him. And first of all, he lied because later I found out that he had unprotected sex with someone he met at a Halloween party and didn't even know, and then didn't tell me, like failed to disclose. So even though we'd had that initial conversation, because every single time I wasn't like anything new I need to know, I didn't ask all the details. I was not given the opportunity to make an informed choice. So I got the worst sore throat of my life. I thought it was strep throat, and I was traveling. I was in another state, and it got worse and worse. And it was a level of pain where I felt ill. I was having a fever. I didn't want to speak. Like I just started to feel really, really bad. And finally, I got a phone call from him one day saying like, hey, I have these sores on my dick and, I've been putting it in ice water and it doesn't work. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, go to the doctor, get tested. And he's like, well, I went to the doctor and they said that I have nothing. And I found out later that he had gotten blood tests and did not have the sores swabbed for some reason. It boggles my mind that that is the care that he received. And I didn't find out until after the fact that that call was an attempt to blame me, but I asked him about the partnership thing. And so when it became clear that it was probably something worse, I had to find out of state healthcare, which was very difficult. I had Kaiser Permanente, and luckily they had one there, but it was like a very expensive, difficult process. And I went there and I was like, I think it's an STI in my throat. And they were like, no, like that's probably not possible. I was like, could you please just swab it? And I had to like speak to several different people and really advocate for myself. And luckily, the doctor I finally ended up with was like, okay, yeah, it might be something. And I will always remember receiving the call from the rudest woman in the world who should not be allowed to work in healthcare and was like, yeah, you have HSV2 in your throat. And I was like, what do I do? And she was not helpful. She didn't talk to me about antivirals. She's like, well, eventually it'll go away. But like, yeah, it was very, very shamey and there was no guidance. And she's like, you're out of state. So, when you go back to your hometown, you can figure it out. And I was like, what? And I was in extreme pain and I got no care. And so I had to go back home. And then even talking to my GP when I got back, I asked to be put on preventative antiviral and she was like, no. And I also found out that most places don't even test for HSV1 or 2. And there's this misconception that oral herpes is HSV1, which 80% of the population has. But like, you can get that on your genitals. And then every doctor was like, It's not possible to have it in your throat. No, that's highly unlikely. No, are you immunocompromised? Do you have cancer? Like all of the literature on it was that it wasn't possible. And I'm like, well, I have it, okay? And I stay very healthy because I had these immuno issues, but it was shocking, and now I do take really good care of myself, and I do have acyclovir, which I take as a suppressive therapy and so that I can safely play with people, but the process was atrocious, and it was so difficult to advocate for that swab, and I have not met another person that had anything resembling my experience. So I didn't make a company, but you did. That's a huge response. Like, what? How? Huge. Like, that's huge.
Well, that is an absolutely incredible story. I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm more sorry about the healthcare that you received. I had a gentleman on my YouTube called Positive Places for Positive People. So I'll give a shout out to Courtney.
I love that.
He's a young guy that got herpes simplex virus, and it really kind of tossed his life upside down. And of course, a lot of people really struggle with that diagnosis. It's kind of like the stigma outweighs the actual medical concerns.
Yeah.
But he started a nonprofit to help other people in that situation. And I asked him one time, I said, Courtney, in your experience, why do you think medical professionals give that herpes diagnosis, which may really be upsetting to whoever's getting it, in such a cold, you know, uh, short type of way? And he said, I've asked doctors that question before. And he said, it's because doctors are dealing with so many, somebody has heart disease, somebody may have just gotten diagnosed with cancer, somebody else is having renal failure. You have herpes to that doctor is like, oh, you have herpes. Feel lucky that that's all you have. It's not a big deal. But to that patient, it is a big deal. But if you think about it from the provider point of view, it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of get now why this is like a 10-second, yeah, you have herpes, go on about your life type of
Yeah.
situation when you think about all the other things that they're dealing with.
I met a doctor that told me they received the advice to tell patients to not tell their partners because so many people have herpes and it's not that big of a deal. Where and a lot of the stigma comes from, I think it was in the 80s, there was this Time magazine article that basically was just a ton of herpes stigma, and the reality is like outbreaks could be low. Like there are ways to play safely if people are very, very scared, and testing's a huge part of it, but also like so many people have it. It's about a matter of discussion and risk tolerance and awareness. So do you guys test for herpes? Like what are all of the things that are available through Shameless Care, and like how did you build this company around your experience?
Well, I just kind of threw my life savings at it and didn't worry too much about if it was going to work out financially or not. And the judge is still out on that, I suppose. But I always just believe that if you work hard enough and you help enough people, that the money will take care of itself. So we test really thoroughly. And so we had a decision to make, which was, do we use an in-person collection center like a Quest or a LabCorp, which most of your listeners will have one in their neighborhood or in their town anyway. But I found out that they don't offer throat swab collection at their phlebotomy centers. And of course, that was foundational to the whole point of the company.
Yeah.
So we had to go with an STI testing, a lab company that offers at-home testing, where essentially you collect the samples in the privacy of your home and then mail them back to the lab. And that way we can have throat swabs and anal swabs. So our main testing panel tests for 14 different sexually transmitted infections. The ones that everybody's probably familiar with, obviously, HIV, syphilis, so on and so forth. But the ones that people test positive for the most often that I don't think people realize, trichomonas, which is the single most common curable STI in the United States, even though most of your listeners were not tested for that during their last STI testing exam. Mycoplasma genitalium, which is extremely common. I think people would be absolutely shocked to see the STI test results that I see every day and see how often Mycoplasma genitalium is positive. And then oral gonorrhea. 80% of our gonorrhea cases are oral only. And it just breaks my heart to think, had they went somewhere else, they would have just gotten a negative gonorrhea test result like me.
Holy cow, that is crazy. So what you offer on the website, like listeners right now could go and get an at-home STI kit? Because I know that's a big barrier for entry for a lot of people, of like having to go to the place.
It is. One of the things that's foundational to our company is that we have a team of 24 board certified physicians. And so we are not a lab that's selling direct to consumer STI testing. We are a telemedicine company. And so when people go to shamelesscare.com and order an STI test, they're assigned a board certified physician that's licensed in their state. So if somebody lives in Arkansas, let's say, and if one of your listeners lives in Arkansas, I'm not talking about you, I just made the state up. They're going to be assigned a doctor that's licensed in Arkansas. The patient is going to fill out a complete medical profile, including, their medical history, any allergies that they have, their local preferred pharmacy, all of those sorts of things. And then if the doctor deems it appropriate, which almost every time they do, then the doctor actually orders the STI testing for the patient, and the kit is mailed to the patient's home. The patient collects the samples themselves, which is an anal swab, an oral swab, a urine test, and a dried blood spot card, mails it back to the lab. The results are ready 2 days after it gets back to the lab. And then that same doctor reviews the results. And if that patient has an infection, which can be easily treated by telemedicine, like a mycoplasma genitalium, trichomonas, chlamydia, etc., then that prescription is automatically sent to that local pharmacy that they chose at the beginning of the process, because there's a real doctor patient relationship there. And any doctor who orders STI testing also has an obligation to treat that patient as well. And so I'm not dismissing companies that just do the lab testing component of it, but I am telling you that after doing this for 4 years, I wouldn't offer testing that doesn't have the medical component, because when people test positive for something like mycoplasma genitalium, they don't even know what it is. And to expect them to like print off these test results, walk down to a CVS pharmacy, a clinic or something like that, and expect that nurse in there to know how to treat it is not only a pain in the butt, it's illogical. Just have the physician who ordered the test go ahead and treat the patient right off the bat. So that's the way that our process works for our testing.
Oh my gosh, that streamlined care also that's human, that has that human relationship component of connection. I really wish that that is how we did it at the ranches. Because also just being able to do it in the comfort and safety of my own home, I'm assuming that people are instructed clearly how to do everything, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, there is room for error, and we're really honest with people. Like, self-collection does put the responsibility in the hands of the patient. If you think about something, throat swab test, somebody could take the throat swab out of the package, just run it around in the air, stick it in the tube, send it off to the lab. The only thing the machine at the lab is going to know is that it didn't detect gonorrhea,
right.
didn't detect chlamydia. It's really not going to know if you collected the sample properly or not. So there is a certain amount of responsibility that goes into the hands of the patient. And I'm kind of an odd person, because there are at home testing companies that work with like the pornography industry and things like that. But I don't know that that's really appropriate, to tell you the truth, because nobody is really watching the patient collect these samples. We verify their identity when they get the doctor consultation. But as far as whose blood is actually on that card, when it gets to the lab doesn't know that. It's not like we have a DNA test on this person. You just know if the person had HIV or syphilis or Hep B, Hep C, that sort of thing. And so I do think that at home testing is really, really cool, but I don't know that it's appropriate for people who might have an incentive to be dishonest, like
Fair point.
somebody who's showing back up on set in 3 days and really needs this to be negative, that sort of
Oh yeah, I always forget that people lie. Literally, my brain cannot process. Like that's the I'm revealing my vulnerabilities. I'm thinking more from the perspective of like the reason we're not allowed to do anal legally at the ranches is we aren't swabbed in the anus, and so that's
thing.
just an official like no go. It's not to say that I haven't heard stories of it happening with people. It's simply
Yeah.
not allowed, and I guess I also assumed that anyone who's going to go the distance to receive this kind of tailored care, or what I perceive as tailored care, is wanting to kind of like do it correctly, assuming they can follow basic instructions. I mean, we all, any of us who went through the COVID era, have probably got pretty good at swabbing things all around, sticking stuff in places. I also, as you speak, I'm like, that's a hot medical kink fantasy in a power exchange relationship that I could totally imagine having fun with, you know? Because the through line of this podcast really is safety is sexy. When people feel safe, it's like we were talking about that confidence earlier. That's really awesome. Okay, so STI testing, comprehensive STI testing in all sorts of ways. What else does Shameless Care offer? I know you have all sorts of things. I was kind of just browsing over the website and I'm still getting acquainted, but what else are you excited about that you're able to offer people?
So we offer a whole host of medication. One of our biggest sellers is Doxy-PEP, which I'll go ahead and explain as if your listeners have never heard of it before, but I'm sure many of them have. It's the antibiotic doxycycline that's been around for decades. For example, I just had a mole cut off of my face. The plastic surgeon prescribed me doxycycline so I wouldn't get acne while it was healing. It's a very common antibiotic. But if you take 200 milligrams of it, so a single dose of 200 milligrams, within 72 hours of unprotected sex, and unprotected oral sex is unprotected sex, it pretty dramatically lessens the likelihood of contracting gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. Now, when this first came out, there was a good bit of misinformation about it in terms of its effectiveness with cisgendered women. And all across the world, there were headlines that there wasn't any evidence that it works in cisgendered women. The unfortunate issue with that is that at the time, there had only been one study completed, which had women in Kenya, I believe. And when the researchers took hair samples from the women to see had they actually taken the doxycycline, most of them hadn't. And so it's not that the doxy-PEP didn't work for those women, it's that most of them didn't take it. There was a more recent study out of Japan with female sex workers in Japan that were taking Doxy-PEP, and it was a home run. It showed a huge decrease in gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And so someone in my position who's looking at STI test results all day, every day, and everybody fears HIV and everybody fears this, that, and the other thing. It's really these bacterial STIs that people are much more likely to contract.
Yeah.
And so if you can take something that lessens your risk, then that's fantastic. Another point out of that study in Japan that I thought was fascinating is that those women had no increased incidences in BV or yeast infection, which I know is a concern that women often have with antibiotics, but doxycycline, generally speaking, doesn't impact women in that way. And remember, you're taking like a dose, occasionally whenever this type of situation might come up. So Doxy-PEP is a big seller for us. Of course, ED medication as well, which everybody's probably familiar with. And if you're like me, you get way too many advertisements for ED medication from all these different subscription services. So I'll spare you guys those.
I
But
do.
they're all
I get
available
so
at
many.
Shameless
It's
Care as
funny
well.
that I
Yeah.
get them, but like it's so funny, and I always just have to say hard boners are fun. They're so important. And I just also want people to have conversations about the connection in addition to that. And I love that. So you can talk to a physician, right? And then get a prescription.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And prescription is key. We don't do subscriptions at Shameless Care. So if anybody wants to try anything using the coupon code LOVER, which I believe is your coupon code, they can do so with the confidence in a couple of things. One is the price that you see on the website is the total price. That's the doctor consultation, the medication, the shipping, the tax, everything. They'll get a nice discount using your coupon code, by the way. And we will never, ever, ever rebill their credit card because I am just so sick of everything being a subscription and my part-time job being like canceling subscriptions and pausing
Yes.
subscriptions and things like that. So we just hate those. So we don't do them. But another medication that I am just absolutely fascinated by right now that we offer at Shameless Care is oxytocin. And if your listeners aren't familiar, oxytocin is a peptide hormone that your body releases naturally during like orgasm and breastfeeding and cuddling. It's kind of that new relationship energy, that bonding feeling that a lot of us, all of us have experienced, I suppose. But when taking it exogenously, so from outside the body, the research is really fascinating and overwhelmingly positive. there's research, for example, showing that women are much more likely to lean into a conversation with a man that she finds attractive if she's taken this oxytocin, for example. It can lessen couples' fights, like shorten the period of time that
Yeah.
they're in a conflict. And to me, it's one of those things that just makes sex better. So, for example, kisses feel better, touches feel better. It's one of those things where it just kind of like, to me, it turns back the clock into more of that new relationship energy that, can dissipate over time. And so it's a really cool medication that we're really proud of at Shameless Care. And we offer that in two formats. One is specifically for women, which is an tongue sublingual with tadalafil, which is the male ED medication. It also can help blood flow in the genitalia of
Yeah.
women. And then we also offer a nasal spray as well. Now, I want to caution all of your listeners because people often try something like this, say the nasal one, they'll spray it up their nose and they'll say, "Well, I didn't feel anything." And it's like, it's not a shot of
Not a
bourbon,
high. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
yeah.
You didn't smoke weed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's
Whoa.
it's it's subtle, it's happening behind the scenes. I mean, what I try to remind people is if it got you high, it would be a controlled substance. Like that's not what it does. It works kind of subtly and behind the scenes. And as we talked about earlier, I feel like sex is so reciprocal, and I'm sure that you do as well. Where like
Yeah.
you're feeding off that person's energy, and then you're giving it back, and then they're feeding off, and it's like it builds like a
It's
fire
it's
burning
either
over
a
time.
positive feedback loop or a negative
Yeah,
feedback loop.
exactly, exactly. So if you have something that helps you just give off a little bit more of that energy, it just gets reciprocated. And so oxytocin for me is the thing that I think I've been the most surprised about since we've been in this business because I sort of dismissed it a little bit. But after reading the research, I was like, okay, we'll try this. And then it's now my favorite, sexual medication at shamelesscare.com is the oxytocin.
And you can use the code LOVER, and the link is in the description below if you want to click directly on it. But I am wrapping my brain around this because I'm like, I mean, I'm just a curious person. I feel like I probably have oxytocin flooding through my system, but I'm like, I want to try it. That sounds really cool. And the other thing that jumps into my mind is I speak with so many people, so many couples who have lost the spark and they're in sort of the like standoff. Dr. Sue Johnson calls it the protest polka. Like it's a disconnection thing.
Mhm.
And the first question I always ask when couples are kind of at this like, well, they didn't, well, he didn't, well, she didn't, well, I'm like, how much non sexual physical touch do you have in your connection? And all too often, it's none. So I'm like, okay, so you're low on bonding hormone. So, and then if there's no starting point, someone doesn't want to be vulnerable enough to go first, it's like, well, how do you do this? So that I gotta go look at the research. I didn't know this. I've only heard about nasal oxytocin being used in like autism research, which I have so many thoughts and opinions on that doesn't fit into this conversation. But I didn't realize that that was
Mhm.
something that was prescribable to the general public. What are the criteria for receiving it?
Well, the great thing about Shameless Care is that people can request the medication, they can fill out the medical intake form, they'll see all the qualifying questions that the physician has. The physician might have some questions for them, the patient might have some questions for the physician. And then if the physician declines a prescription or if the patient is like, "You know what? You answered my questions, but this is really no longer something that I'm interested in," then they get a full refund, they're not charged
Okay.
anything at all. So
Okay.
it's kind of a risk-free process for both
Okay.
sides.
Because I'm like, I'm so curious. I would probably get denied if I were honest, to be honest, because I'd really feel like I have so much like dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin flowing through me. Like I seem to be more like, "Ah," like people are like, are you on something? I'm like, nope, I'm a natural heart opener. you know, that is so cool. Have you tried it yourself or do you know anyone directly who has?
I have, yeah, it's my personal favorite sexual medication. Um, it really seems to help me because I'm constantly thinking about business. When I'm sleeping, I'll wake up, check my
Yeah.
email. Like I'm just constantly, I mean, I'm in the game. I'm trying to make this work, and millions of people around the country in the same situation I am. But when it does come to be date night, it's super unfair of my partner who just wants an escape, who is also working to be burdened by my bullshit, my baggage, And I find that much more so than alcohol, it just helps me get in the mood for date night. It's really, really nice from that standpoint. So it's one of those products, when you're talking about oxytocin, we also have one called Shamelessly Aroused, which is a topical Viagra cream. It's sildenafil, which is the active ingredient in Viagra. But women put that on their genitalia to increase blood flow. When you talk about these sorts of medications, because sexuality is so difficult, right? It's unlike an erection. Like the guy either has an erection or he doesn't. And it's pretty easy for a guy to be like, "Oh, I took this ED med and now I'm harder than I've been in months." Like that, this
Yeah.
is a win. It's hard to quantify that response with some of these other medications, particularly for women. Like I said earlier, I take the nasal oxytocin and I'll be like, "Oh my God, that sex was absolutely amazing." But can I say for sure that that was because
Right.
of the oxytocin? I really can't. I'm just a guy that always falls back on the research, which, by the way, people go to the landing pages, shamelesscare.com/oxytocin. You can look around on the website. On all of our landing pages, if you scroll down, you'll see links to peer reviewed scientific research so people can kind of judge for themselves.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up that point because it's just like with any ED medication, it's not having the boner that makes the sex better. It's the confidence that that creates because I know that I definitely have been with lovers where when I'm like, I don't care, like my toy can be any firmness. Softness is great, hardness is great. We can be more creative. And when hardness is so important to the penis owner, it absolutely makes the whole experience better because they are suddenly able to get out of their heads. I also have had direct experiences with many people who think that the ED medication is going to fix everything. And then they stay in their heads and they're like, oh my gosh, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? I was like, it's working because we're having fun. Well, I'm having fun, like, and so that's the piece. It's like there's the physiological response and then there's also what it makes possible in the connection. And so I love that you brought that up. For the oxytocin, how long does it take to kick in? I know that many ED things are various amounts of time depending on how they're delivered to the system. With the nasal spray or the sublingual, like what is kind of the timing like?
I think the general approach that people take is about 15 to 30 minutes. I personally, just my own experience is that the nasal oxytocin probably works faster than that,
Okay.
but it's a little bit hard to say definitively. And these things are so dependent upon the person.
Yeah.
For example, I would equate it to ED medication where I can literally see, not just because of my penis, but because I'll start to get flush if I'm on like a healthy dose of ED medication. Like I can tell when it's taking effect.
Yeah.
And, generally for me, it takes about 15 minutes, even for a capsule that I swallow that for somebody else might take 45 minutes, right? So everybody's a little bit different, but I would say about 15 minutes for the oxytocin under sublingual or nasal is probably a pretty good rule of thumb for people.
That is so interesting. Okay, lovers, use the code LOVER and then share sex stories about it. I am so curious for any of you who might be candidates out there. I am so curious about these experiments and how they might go. What other interesting things should people be looking out for?
Another thing that's really exciting is the Shamelessly Aroused cream, which I mentioned earlier, which is a topical sildenafil cream. There
Yeah.
was some fantastic research that was released about that about a year ago in terms of improving sexual response in women. So, just like with erectile dysfunction, arousal really starts in the brain. But then what you see in the genitalia is the physiological response to that arousal. And just like blood flow with men can weaken over time, and I'm 45, so I'm well aware of this, the same thing happens to all of us, including women. And so this topical cream, it doesn't have the systematic, body-wide effects because it is topical, but it increases blood flow to the genitals. And the thing that I have experienced as a, heterosexual male with women is pretty dramatically increased lubrication. Not every time, of course, this is so hormonal and this is so, so many things go into lubrication, as everybody knows who's listening
And
to
we're
me right now.
always a fan of adding more lube because it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think people are pretty amazed when you see that optimal blood flow to the genitals. what actually changes with that. It's really, really cool. And we offer that in 30 grams, and everybody else seems to offer it in 15. But I think Shameless Care customers have more sex than other people potentially. And then it's also 3% sildenafil as opposed to 1%. And we chose that strength because that's what the study looked at, was 3% sildenafil. So we're really excited about that one as well. And the feedback we get on that is overwhelmingly positive. I think people universally
Yeah.
love that product.
I love the idea of that too, because even literally the act of applying it, if one partner is doing that for the other, it is an invitation to play that's beyond the like, let's put it in now. It's like a literal warm-up moment. And if that's done with care in the name of connection and then paying attention to the body to see how long it takes for the response to come in. I mean, that's my favorite, is treating each interaction with a lover like today's experiment. Like, I love reading research studies, and I believe we can. And if I believe in shoulds, I would say we should all do our own anecdotal research on our pleasure. And it sounds like you offer people so many ways to do that. Anything else that we got to know about that people can use the code LOVER if they get curious and want to try it out?
I think people should just remember that we don't do subscriptions. We have
Yeah.
fantastic customer service. I mean, we're a small company.
Yeah.
So that is really, when people go on Instagram and they see all these ads for the big name telemedicine companies, realize that those companies get thousands of customers per day. And if you go to Trustpilot and read the reviews, you'll see that they sometimes struggle in handling that. And so we're a small team. We have a small team of 24 physicians, a small customer service team, and we live and die with every customer. I take things way too personally sometimes. We've had one-star review in our history of our company, and I still remember the woman's email, and I remember I was on a date, in fact, when I saw the email,
Oh,
when I saw it come through. It really broke my heart. And I'm sorry for her. She didn't have a good experience, she says, and that's our fault. But I'm just making the point that I feel like people can really trust us for a number
yeah.
of reasons. One is we're going to make things right, but also we're not going to rebill their credit card. So if they want to try something like the nasal oxytocin, and if it doesn't work well for them, they had fun, they tried it, they're not going to get another bill in a month or 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's also the thing, is like expectations are so important. People come to see me and they think I can solve all of their problems. And if they are mentally, emotionally, and physically open, yes, of course. Otherwise, even like when I take pictures of people, I can only meet the subject where they are at. If someone is so closed and defended, it's like nothing's going to help them. There's only so much we can do. The other thing that I would love to hear about, just circling back to what we touched on when I shared my story and you shared your story, is the doctors that I interfaced with were not great. Obviously, you have doctors that probably are great. But if someone listening is like nervous to talk to the doctors, is there a way to handhold them through it? Or kind of like, what would you say to anyone who's listening who's like, oh my gosh, I'm even scared to make this telehealth next step?
Great question. So, most states allow what's called an asynchronous visit, where a patient fills out a medical intake form. They do ask the doctors questions, but then the doctor reviews it, sometime later. So, most of the time, it's not a real face to face. There are a few states that require that video call or that telephone call, but in most circumstances, people are not forced anyway. They certainly can, but they're not forced to have that conversation directly with the doctor, which I feel like helps most people be comfortable with
Mm.
that. For example, we certainly have a lot of patients who order ED medication who will say something like, doctor, I'm fine at home, but I was in the orgy room with my wife the other day at the local swinger club, and I had some problems. And so just being able to have that sort of conversation with the doctor, even if it's back and forth, written message, I just think is so cool and so conducive to proper health care. But even beyond that, even when people are open and honest with their doctor, and I'm talking about doctors outside of Shameless Care, of which there are some fantastically well-trained doctors when it comes to sexual health, and there are others that don't have that training. Let's face it, we talked about that earlier. But I do think that some people who are very sex positive mistakenly believe that just because they're open and honest with their physician, that that's going to unlock some magic knowledge in the brain of that physician. to be able to STI test them properly. So if you go to your doctor and say, I'm a swinger, I'm polyamorous, or whatever, I'm out there, I'm dating around, that doctor is immediately going to know about things like throat swabs, for example. Most of the time, they're just not. I saw a recent study, it came out about a month ago, that looked at 45 million gonorrhea and chlamydia tests in the United States. Only 1% of women were throat swab tested. 1%.
Oh
So
my
you can
goodness.
imagine, you can only imagine how much this is contributing to the spread of bacterial STIs like gonorrhea and chlamydia. So people should be open and honest with their physician, but they should also be willing to hand that physician a piece of paper and say, these are the tests that I'm requesting. And we have an opportunity to help people with that at Shameless Care. If you go to shamelesscare.com, up at the top, it says resources, and then it says free STI testing. So make no mistake, we definitely want you to buy STI testing using coupon code LOVER.
Yes.
But if that is just out of the realm of possibility for you, then by all means, go to the shamelesscare.com, resources, free STI testing. We have some resources there that you can screenshot, you can take to your doctor and advocate for yourself to get that better testing. We also have, and I'm so proud of this, a 60-second video from a doctor, which you can show your doctor in the exam room in case your doctor looks at you and says the same thing mine said to me, which is throat swab. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And it's essentially a doctor saying, hey, this is how you do a throat swab. I'm a physician too. It's the orange Aptima swab. It's already in your exam room. You do it just like you do strep throat. You code it in the computer this way. It's a piece of cake. The truth is most doctors just don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if they knew how to do it, they would gladly do it for you. So I just wanted to let people know about that resource as well.
I love that so much because that highlights a piece I hadn't even thought about, even though it's been in the back of my mind, is the shame that doctors still have simply because they are a doctor and an authority. It doesn't mean that their own sexual trauma, whatever it is, capital or lowercase t, has been healed, right? I know so many physicians who are uncomfortable. And, early on, when I was in year one of this podcast and I got throat herpes, I remember looking back, I'm like, oh, that was a rhetorical question. But when I heard the doctor say, how did you get it in your throat? I said, I'm good at deep throating. And and then I saw the look on their face and I was like, oh my God, social faux pas. And also like, I made them uncomfortable, but I assumed that being open and honest and clear was always the best. I always assume that because again, I forget that humans uh, tell funny stories to be comfortable sometimes.
We'll talk about a leading question. I mean, they're the one that asked you how you got it
I
in your
know.
throat.
I know. I know.
I'm not sure what answer they were expecting.
I'm like, how else could I say the answer anyway? But I think they meant more like, you don't have cancer? And I was like, yes, I don't have cancer. I don't know. Like, what do you want me to say? But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were surprised. We're all surprised. Okay, so how do we spread the word? What are your hopes going forward for Shameless Care and also for your own sex life? Like, I would love to hear best case scenario hopes, goals, and dreams for the future.
All right. Well, I think from a business point of view, we're really trying to spread the word about proper STI testing. One of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me actually came from a swinger podcast group. And they said, Robert, we don't know what this means for you money wise or business wise or sanity wise, but there's no doubt about it that more people in the swinger community know about throat swab testing because of you. And I was like, yes,
That's awesome.
because that's my thing, right? I feel like if we help enough people, then the business side of things will take care of themselves. I
Yeah.
really truly believe that. And if we're able to help people by them just getting better testing from their doctor, they no doubt work super hard for their insurance, then I think that's absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for asking me about my own sex life. I would say, because I go to hedonism every single year on a business trip, I would say that I'm looking forward to being the old Robert again that goes to an event like that and is actually enjoying the sexual energy and able to say, you know what, business is okay now. Business is okay now. My obsessing about it isn't necessarily always helpful. Let's just chill and relax for a while. That's really what I'm looking forward to because I used to be so good at that, and I'm just not anymore.
Okay, well, you can practice. And lovers, if any of this is resonating with you and you think it might be for you, use the code LOVER at shamelesscare.com so that Robert can happily relax and just like celebrate. I'm like very excited for you to hit a sales goal and then be like, yep, Luna, here's how I relaxed. Okay, my last question. How do you think we collectively can make this world a sexier, more loving place? And how do you like to spread ripples of love? I mean, obviously, Shameless Care is spreading huge ripples of love, but on a personal level, what do you think?
This might seem like a really weird answer, and perhaps it is, but I'm reading all of these things anymore about a Gen Z sex recession,
Yeah.
which really just breaks my heart because people have never been more connected and also more disconnected. And I feel like, life is so precious and particularly your youth. I mean, these people who are Gen Z now, like that goes quick, as I certainly know, and a lot of your listeners probably know. And it just breaks my heart that they're not having that in-person connection anymore. So I feel like if we can do things like your sex positive podcast and to a lesser degree the work that we're doing to make sex what it should be, which is a normal, fun, healthy part of being a human, I just think that's wonderful.
We share some life goals. Well, lovers, links are in the description below. Robert, thank you so much for being a guest on Sex Stories.
Thank you.
Lovely humans, that is our show. Remember to follow your hearts and follow your parts and follow me on the internet for links to all the things podcast guest submissions, photo sessions, creative coaching, or to wander deeper down my internet rabbit holes. Head to sexstoriespodcast.com and lunarabi.com. Support the show and get ad-free episodes and access to the community live streams at patreon.com/howtowoo. To go deeper, see my exclusive self-portraits, masturbation, meditation, sensation, explorations of edging, or to tell me your most personal pleasures, thoughts, and feelings, maybe you even show me, join me on OnlyFans. Links are in the description below. Remember to tell a friend, leave a review, heart, or thumbs up this show wherever you're listening. It helps us grow, and you know I love watching things grow. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, let me know how you're spreading ripples of love, and remember to share sex stories.